value. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just make sure you guys can hear me okay. Yes, okay. Thank you. Well, we will go ahead and call the August 25th, 2021 HSAC meeting to order. It is 3:01. I anticipate that we will have a few more folks trickling in. We will have some voting items on the agenda this afternoon. So before we get to that point, I will just stop and just check in just to make sure that we have a quorum. So good afternoon to all. Jumping right on into our meeting agenda. We will change the agenda around just a little bit, just some of the sequence of the items, but our goal is to accomplish everything that's on our listed agenda this afternoon. I wanted to get this meeting started with just reviewing our goals. So first, starting with the finish the job of ending chronic homelessness, prevent and end veterans homelessness, prevent and end homelessness for families, youth, and children. And then lastly, set a path to ending all types of homelessness. So those are our goals. We want to remember those at the top of all of our meetings, just to remind ourselves of our mission. The next thing on our agenda is to review the minutes. And I'm seeking approval for those. Prior to today's meeting, the minutes for May 26, 2021 were sent out. Also, the meeting minutes for June 23rd, 2021 were sent out. I will pause here to see if anybody have any recommended revisions for either the May 26 minutes or the June 23rd minutes. All right. I did not hear any changes or any revisions to be made for the May meeting minutes, nor do I hear any changes or revisions to be made for the June 23rd minutes. At this time, I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes as outlined.
Move to accept. Birch.
Thank you, Dr. Birch. First, second.
I second.
I think that's Ebony. Thank
Yes.
you. All right, so first and second. Let me make sure that we have a quorum. Thank you, Ruby. All right, so I will entertain a vote on the floor to accept the minutes for May 26, 2021 and for June 23rd, 2021 as it states on the outline. If you are in agreement, you can vote in our chat box here. Yes, if you accept the minutes, nay, if you don't, or if you abstain. Okay, thank you, Sharita.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir. Dr. Birch.
can we get the sign up sheet in chat?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Right. All right, thank you for your votes. We will accept the minutes for May and June. And we do note you abstaining, Sharita. Thank you. And yes, Ruby can help us out with the attendance link in the chat box. Thank you. All right, moving right along. For our public comment period, we have Mr. Furman here with us this afternoon. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Alicia. I just wanted to, share with the group. I know I've had conversations with some of you, and others might have seen, various email blasts and newsletters or whatnot. But I have, accepted an offer to be the executive director of the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. I started in that role on August 9th, so I've been here all of 2.5 weeks. So a lot to learn about what's going on at the state level. I have been in the county nonprofit seat. And, just want to be transparent with everyone that, I spoke with Colin today. I think there's going to be kind of a legal review about whether I can continue to fill that seat. I think, if anything comes up, many of you know that NCCEH has been, works very closely with the city of Durham around the HMIS system. And as we have a contractual relationship around the HMIS data. I would need to recuse myself in any of those conversations. And I think just for optics, any funding questions related to families moving forward, I will also be recusing myself just so there's no appearance of a conflict. But, I'm hoping to be able to stay on. Obviously, love this community and passionate about this work. I just wanted everyone to know about the change. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work together on the HSAC. And if not, I promise I'll be working together with you and many folks in Durham around a variety of issues related to homelessness and housing. So just want everybody to know.
Thank you, Ryan. And yes, congrats and to you in that new role. Now you will be looking at homelessness from, yes, a much greater lens across the state. So I also am at some of those meetings. So nice to continue working with you in that capacity. Yes, absolutely, Commissioner Carter, absolutely. All right, so moving right along, we have a speaker with us, a guest this afternoon. Thank you to Matthew Landers for joining us. So Mr. Landers is going to join us this afternoon to talk with us about justice involved in homelessness. So thank you so much, Mr. Landers, for your time. I will give you the floor. Do you have a presentation to share? I think we might have shared it with this group prior to, so we do have the notes, but if you wanted to share, you are in the driver's seat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can share my screen in a second. And I guess to introduce myself to everyone here. Hi, I'm Matt. Thank you for letting me join your meeting today. I guess to give a little bit of background on myself, I was a Master's of Public Policy student at Duke this past spring. I actually just graduated, and I'm actually currently working for the state right now in the Department of Health and Human Services. But what I'm about to present on today, and if I can share my screen, is actually my findings from my master's project that I completed at Duke on justice involved homelessness. And let me just figure out if I can do the sharing okay. Hold on a second. Okay, can you guys see the presentation okay?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through a few slides. I'll try and get through them somewhat quickly. And I'll stop and call for questions if you have any on anything related to it. And yeah, also I feel like when I have these Zoom presentations, I don't know, I'm a little bit spacey and I could always feel like I'm talking to myself. So not only would interruptions be okay, they'd definitely actually be welcome as well. So feel free to interrupt or whatnot. Okay, and actually let me fix this real quick on my side. Okay, so yeah, like I mentioned, I did this project as sort of a fulfillment of my master's program at Duke. And this project was sort of a partnership between the city's community development department as well as the county criminal justice resource center. I'll refer to them. I'm not sure how familiar people are with the terminology, but I'll just refer to them as a CJRC from here on out. But yeah, this kind of came about. I was originally brainstorming with the community development team, Hanalea Hoberman and Lloyd Schmelder, to be exact. And they said they were interested in this sort of intersection between homelessness and criminal justice. They explained the two areas, largely operate as siloed systems, not only within Durham, but also at the state and federal levels as well. And they were interested in generally, how could they better integrate these systems and do so in a way that was supported by the data. And if I had to summarize my project in one or two sentences, it kind of had both a quantitative and a qualitative branch. So this is data and interviews. So with the data, basically what I was doing, I was looking at the clients in the CJRC system, so like the criminal justice system, basically seeing if their names showed up in the homelessness system, so HMIS, and then seeing what other factors might have predicted their entry into homelessness or distinguish them from the broader homelessness population. And then with the interviews, just looking to acquire like more in-depth insight to figure out, what does that data actually mean, and how can it be like translated into like actionable improvements. And I won't spend too much time actually on this slide because you're probably well more into the weeds in this than I am. But as you know, homelessness can be both a cause and a consequence of having a criminal record. But this project sort of was more targeting the prison to homelessness pathway, which is what this formerly incarcerated are 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general population. That's what that's getting to. In 2017, the city of Durham established a local reentry council, which is a statewide initiative that aims to combat this issue. But in general, like especially this is reflected in like the background literature that I did, there's like 3 kind of obstacles that this intersection often deals with. The biggest one probably being jurisdictional clarity. So like jails and prisons, as you know, they're typically not responsible for inmates after they release them. And also funding and regulations often prevent like housing providers from actually serving clients until they become homeless. So there's a real kind of potential for a gap in service provision here. And then the risk factors, I'll talk a lot more about that as I continue on. And then housing exclusion policies, depending on the crime you commit, it's often very difficult for or to prove that a landlord might be legally discriminating against somebody in the housing market because of their criminal record, even though it's technically illegal. Okay, and so I'll get right down into like the data aspects of it, and yeah, feel free to flag me down and ask any questions if any of this is flying over anyone's head. But so in general, due to like the feasibility constraints surrounding that this was just like an academic project that I did for my program, the scope of my analysis was confined to 1 6-bed transitional housing unit that's operated by the CJRC. And in my project, over the 11-year period, 316 clients stayed at this 6-bed transitional housing unit. And of those 316, 85 of them were detected in Durham's HMIS system. You might notice that the years don't quite match up. HMIS data only goes as far back as 2014, and that's just necessarily due to like data quality. So that 26.9% homelessness rate, that probably is a little bit of an underestimation. But nonetheless, the big focus of my study was focusing on these 85 clients who started out in the CJRC housing unit and then ended up in the HMIS system. Okay, and the first question that I looked at, like from a data perspective, was what predicted whether a CJRC client later endured homelessness. So here I'm comparing 2 groups. So first of all, the 85 CJRC clients that I mentioned before who became homeless. In the graphs below, they're always going to be on the right column here. Like, I don't know if you can see my point or not, but I've labeled yes. And we're comparing those 85 to the CJRC clients who never appeared in HMIS. So about 200 or so clients. In this first point above, older age, that actually coincides with the purple graph on the left. As you can see, on average, the homelessness group CJRC is much older than the non-homelessness group. The homelessness group was also much more likely to have stayed at the CJRC facility multiple times and also for shorter durations. In this last point, the 4th bullet here, what I mean by exited the CJRC under negative circumstances, so that's like if they got kicked out, they violated their probation or some other explanation. And that coincides with the graph on the right. So the blue areas indicate a negative exit. And as you can see, the blue part makes up a much larger fraction of the bar graph on the right, the homelessness side, than it does on the left. And that would conclude that CJRC clients who became homeless were much more likely to have a negative exit. Does that make sense, or does anybody have any questions on any of that, or can I clarify anything before I go to the next slide? Okay, cool. Well, I'll continue on for now, but yeah, feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. In the second part of my data analysis, similar to the first, I was still focusing on these 85 CJRC clients who became homeless, but instead of comparing them to other CJRC clients, now I was comparing them to the broader homelessness population in Durham. So instead of comparing them to about 200 or so other clients, now I'm comparing them to, I forget the exact number, like 3,000 or 4,000 other people from the general population without justice involvement who became homeless or who endured homelessness. And these 85 CGRC involved clients were significantly more likely than the general homeless population not to have health insurance, to have endured homelessness for over a year prior to their intake, to have multiple episodes of homeless, and also mental health issues as well. Don't pay actually too much attention to the last two. Obviously, you would expect the CGRC clients to be more likely to racially identify as Black African American, considering the general makeup of the criminal, or I guess the penal population in America as a whole. And also, I think there might have been one CGRC client who was a female. So naturally, you would expect there to be a low incidence of domestic violence among that population, considering that there weren't many women, and obviously women become homeless. So in the control group, there was more likelihood of domestic violence. I forgot I put that GIF in there, but however, despite like the noticeable differences that I highlighted, there were some surprising factors that, you know, didn't appear unique to justice involved homelessness. I'll explain the first two later, because I'd imagine those are probably a surprise to a lot of people, but I guess long story short, they're very good examples of why you can't rely on data for everything. The interviews that I did highlighted both of these as important to some degree in the prison to homelessness pathway, but just interesting tidbits: marital status, education status, likelihood of using SNAP, TANF, disability. Those, not to say they're not important, but they're not a distinguishing feature of justice involved homelessness in Durham. Maybe this is another good place to stop. Anybody have any questions on this slide or either of the two preceding it? I can always like flick back if needed.
Madam Chair, this is Lloyd from the staff. I have a question, if I could be recognized.
Yes, Lloyd.
So Matt, and thank you for your presentation. In terms of these factors that were not significant, are you saying these factors were not significant in comparing the 85 people to other homeless people, or they were not significant in comparison to the other people that stayed at the CJRC transitional facility, or both populations?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess a very simple answer, it depends. I just kind of put them all on one slide to kind of simplify it, but it depends on what data was available and what data set. So like, to use the example, substance abuse was only available in HMIS. The CJRC didn't track incidences of substance abuse among their clients. So that one in particular would be a comparison of the CJRC clients to the general homeless population in Durham. So yeah, you caught my shortcut. This is a bit of a simplification, but I just generally highlighted these as insignificant, but that's a good question.
Also, I have another question. Given that some of these factors were not significant in terms of your population study or sampling, did you take in consideration the number of times individuals may have cycled in and out of either homelessness or frequented other emergency services areas like hospitals or ER departments?
To address the latter one, I did not, just because of data availability, but that would be like a very interesting study for someone else to definitely do a master's project on. But in terms of amounts of times they cycled through the homelessness system, yes, I did take that into consideration, and that I just flagged it down. I forget what exactly I did. I think I did it as a variable where it's like, did you enter HMIS multiple times? Like, was your name there 2 or 3 times, yes or no? And that, I believe, would be that third bullet right there. So recurring episodes of homelessness, and the CGRC population was significantly more likely to do that than the general population. But that's a good flagging. Okay, any other questions on the data? The qualitative stuff I imagine will be much more intuitive to all of you. So I imagine that'll stimulate more discussion, but anything data wise before I continue on?
We have one more, Matthew, from Commissioner Carter. You have the floor.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Very interesting presentation. Matthew, could you go to the next slide again?
Yep.
So I'm sort of hung up on Lloyd, where Lloyd was with his question. Sorry.
No worries.
Are you saying that employment, there's no significant link between employment and being homeless, or there's no significant link between employment and being justice involved homeless?
The latter more. And I guess, apologies for this, I actually didn't even realize this. The word significant is probably a poor choice of words. That's more of like a statistical vocabulary thing, not to say that it's not important. It's just like basically significance means something in statistics that it doesn't mean in real life. And I think that'll become more evident, I think actually 2 or 3 slides from now.
No, I do understand. I do get that, but
Okay.
thanks. That's helpful.
Okay. Okay, cool. I'll just continue on. I feel like that point in particular will become, I have a lot more details on that point in particular. It's related to one of the 6 recommendations. So now to the qualitative side. So as I mentioned before, I did interviews with, I believe, 6 stakeholders within Durham County. I think a few of them actually on the call today. So thank you if you help participate in this. So I'll briefly go over some of the key recs and some of the big insight from those interviews that helped support these. The biggest one, so streamline access to mental health services. So obviously it was very significant in the data, but it also came up in almost every single interview I did. The big theme related to mental health was that reentry and homelessness facilities, they're poorly designed to meet the long-term needs of those with mental health problems. But as you can see from the quote above, if detainees get released from jail unexpectedly, this provider points out they don't have anywhere else to go. These homes are often the only place in Durham qualified to intake this population quickly. Other providers cited the often abbreviated stays in these facilities as obstacles to delivering comprehensive mental health care. And moreover, housing providers, oftentimes aren't clinicians, and it can be tough to make referrals to facilities that employ clinicians, because oftentimes like a prerequisite for clients is for them to have a dual diagnosis disorder, so an accompanying substance abuse disorder as well. So strictly mental health access is an area of improvement that was definitely identified throughout the course of my project. And this was related to the insignificance that I pointed out previously, and that I was like, take that with a grain of salt. My study also found that this increase in service provision should also cover substance abuse counseling. So despite the data insignificance, pretty much every provider that I talked to cited substance abuse as a major issue. Some in the homelessness system estimated as high as 80% of the people who they serve struggle with substance abuse to some degree. Why there might be a discrepancy between the interviews and the data. One possible explanation, maybe interviewees are overestimating the rate of such problems given the highly visible nature of substance use. So like, it's tough to gauge if someone is suffering from bipolar disorder. On the other hand, it's pretty evident if somebody has a heroin addiction. But probably in this case, the more relevant factor is that clients are likely incentivized to underreport histories of substance abuse because it's often prohibited, or at least perceived to be prohibited in social service settings, which is evidenced by the fact I only think that less than 15% of HMIS clients ever reported an alcohol or drug disorder, which feels a little bit low, I feel like. But yeah, shorter stays in both reentry and emergency housing were perceived to be part of an obstacle to long-term drug treatment in the same way that it restricts mental health access. As you can see in the quote, no one comes into a unit for 6 weeks and it feels like, okay, I'm sober now. But also there were also interviewees that highlighted, watching out for the stigma related to substance abuse disorders, and that not everyone who's leaving the justice system is a drug addict, and that we shouldn't necessarily treat people this way, and we should screen for that effectively. The third recommendation is getting to that point about employment and self-sufficiency. So although employment didn't achieve significance, that's likely due to the fact that HMIS doesn't track anything related to employment, and the CGRC only does when people enter the transitional housing facility, which when you think of it, that's most likely the time they are to be unemployed. Among interviewees that I talked to, job instability was often framed as like part of a larger struggle to reacclimate to society. And actually this picture that I have of the help wanted sign is actually a little bit deceiving, because interviewees also noted that self-management deficiencies aren't necessarily exclusive to the unemployed, and that employment doesn't always equate to financial literacy. I don't think I put this on the slide, but there was one person I talked to, they said, I can't tell you how many times we've had people making decent amounts of money and then they just don't know how to manage that money. So self-management could definitely be a big path forward in terms of pursuing interventions that focus on that, especially considering that most services being currently provided appear to either focus on providing financial assistance or referrals to outside providers, although that's not always the case. But employment and self-sufficiency could definitely be a focal point for improvement. The fourth recommendation, incentivizing longer stays. So like I mentioned before, the data provides strong evidence that shorter stays equal increased likelihood for homelessness among the justice involved. That might partially be due to the transient nature of homelessness, but probably more significant is the controlling environment within these like transitional housing units. So like if you reference a quote, I don't, people don't want to be told when to go to bed or smoke a cigarette. So facilities, therefore, it might be a good idea to communicate the benefits of more committed stays to these clients, or emphasize that even more, possibly even offering, possibly special privileges should they meet, weekly milestones or something along those lines. Oh, and it is also worth noting, I won't go into too much detail here considering the audience, but the project couldn't quantitatively analyze how the length of an incarceration sentence impacts this pathway into homelessness, just because I didn't have the data. But it was interesting that providers universally agreed that individuals returning from longer prison sentences generally fare better inside their programs, at least, which interesting food for thought. The fifth recommendation, so advocacy over communication of release dates. Again, I realize this isn't a criminal justice group, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but definitely can if people are interested in it. But my interviews found, especially in jails, you can imagine how uncertain release dates kind of tend to lead to logistical obstacles, at least in the jails. Someone estimated that 80% of people don't find out if they're being released until the day of, which can indirectly act as a determinant to more comprehensive initiatives within penal facilities. And there can be obviously a lot of downstream implications within the homelessness system in terms of once you fall through the cracks and become homeless, it becomes all the more tedious to initiate preliminary steps to a housing search, such as obtaining IDs and social security cards and such. So definitely potential for advocacy on this front. And then the last one, potentially some investment in a centralized inventory of reentry resources. So it's not all bad news that my project unearthed. Interviewees actually indicated a notable proliferation in service providers that justice-involved homeless have access to. As you can see in the quote, generally speaking, if people want a bed, they can find it. However, provider networking seems to be a little bit slow to follow this proliferation. Many staff still only refer to the same 6 providers. It appears closely tied oftentimes to financial shortages. For example, many of these houses aren't free, or they're constantly preoccupied with finding different nonprofit funders to maintain financial backing and looking for different pots of money to pair to different clients depending on their eligibility requirements. But yeah, more just like kind of flagging down the idea that a quick inventory check could be helpful with some sort of centralized resource. And I know I went through all that quick, so I kind of listed the main kind of key takeaways here. But yeah, that's pretty much all. That's pretty much all the content that I have. But I'm curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts or feedback or any questions on anything that might not have been 100% clear.
I have a comment. You noted that advocate for earlier and more transparent communication of release dates to county detention stakeholders. I'm just wondering, coming from a mental and behavioral health organization, we're constantly being contacted, but we were on the understanding that a lot of individuals transitioning from those settings have some type of release or discharge planning taking place. Did you not find that consistent within your study?
I think those types of discharge planning are much more structured as for people coming out of the prison system in particular, which is, I think, probably has something to do with what I kind of alluded to earlier, that people who have served longer prison sentences generally tend to cope better in these transitional facilities. It seemed to be a little bit more chaotic within like jails specifically, and people often kind of, not to say that they don't have, you know, people who are giving them discharge plans, but also adherence to those plans once they leave the facilities is mixed as well. So I think just generally what that point was kind of getting to is that, you know, the short time crunch makes it difficult to not just develop a discharge plan, but to do one that's comprehensive and like accommodates the needs of the clients, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, it does. And I think there are things, there are the factors contributing to the smooth transition from individuals, whether they're coming from a short-term stay in a jail facility versus a longer-term county facility or state facility. So point well taken.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew, again for your time and your commitment to this special population, I would say. I feel as though that we at the VA, the Veteran Affairs, we do serve veterans that are just as involved, and I'm sure that just as involved touches all of our other populations. Thank you so much for sharing this information. Thank you all for those thoughtful questions. Let me just see if there's any other round of questions before we move on. All righty. Thank you, Matthew. Any last words?
No, yeah, but just thank you for all your time, and I'll make sure to share my materials, like the actual full write-up of the report, as well as the presentation and like the little chat here if you'd like access to that. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. All righty, so we are going to move right along on our agenda. At this point, we're going to switch around a few agenda items just for sake of time. We are going to tackle next our election of HSAC officers. So bear with me. Hopefully I won't be a bull in a china shop. My time as your HSAC chair will be ending, and it is definitely bittersweet. I think I've shared with most of you guys that out of the 27 counties that I serve within the VA healthcare system, Durham is my favorite. Durham has definitely been a trendsetter and definitely raised the bar where I kind of steal some of you guys' best practices and share it with many of our counties across the state. So I'm very happy to have served in this capacity over the last year, and actually very happy about the transition of officers. Many of you know our very own Angel that has served along with me as vice chair for this past year. As the way things have went historically, our vice chair has moved up to serve as chair in the next year. And also our very own Helen Tripp has served as secretary for the HSAC. So historically, our secretary has moved into the vice chair position. So we are excited to have the change of guard for these ladies as they move into the leadership positions. One other thing that we are going to tackle this afternoon is a nominations for secretary. Typically, the exec committee, we would present the HSAC with a slate of nominations. We have met a few times over the last couple of weeks to try to come up with a slate of nominations. Reached out to some folks on the HSAC committee to see if they were interested in serving in the capacity of secretary. Unfortunately, we do not have a slate of nominations to present to the body on today. Some and most of the folks that we reached out to were very much interested and had some very thoughtful questions for myself and Helen, but did feel like in order to serve at their best capacity, they would definitely open that up to others that were interested. So at this time, I want to entertain any motions to have any nominations on the floor for anybody that wants to self-nominate or nominate any others that you may feel are a great fit for our secretary chair, our secretary role. If there are any nominations on the floor, I will entertain them at this time. I think there's a question. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm looking at a message now. Okay. Okay. Okay, so yes, thank you, Ruby, for putting that in there. You'll see in the comments, Ruby listed out the role of the secretary, and I stand corrected. I've been informed that we do actually have someone that is interested. So I will definitely, on her behalf, present her as a nomination as secretary. I will, let me see, let me catch the name. I want to make sure I do not pronounce it incorrectly. Okay. All right, so I have 2 nominations on the floor. Okay. All right, so as it stands right now, I have 2 nominations on the floor. The first being Shay Kennard. Hopefully I'm not pronouncing your name incorrectly. That is the first nomination. She is actually a brand new HSAC member. I was gonna welcome her a little bit later in the agenda, but thank you for being interested and agreeable to the nomination. So that is my first nomination on the floor is for Shay Kennard. And my second nomination is for Dr. Birch. I have a nomination for Dr. Birch on the floor. Thank you. Just make sure I'm not missing any other ones.
Alicia, can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
So I did the nomination for Angelo Birch. I don't know if Dr. Birch wants to accept that nomination or not.
Yes, I'll accept.
Thank you. All righty. Now I see, did you nominate someone, Angel? Is that a third nomination?
I was trying to nominate Shayna, but I kept messing up the name.
Thank you, Angel. I'm not actually a member of the HSAC.
Oh, okay.
I'm a liaison, but thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so as it stands, we have 2 nominations on the floor, one for Ms. Kennard, the second for Dr. Birch. At this time, I will entertain a motion to have a vote on the floor. Oh, okay. Okay, hold on just a minute before we entertain the motion. Let me make one more call for any nominations on the floor. Last call, going once, going twice. Any other nominations? Let me see if I can scroll through and see some faces. Okay. Any other nominations on the floor? Okay. All right. Thank you for those nominations. At this time, I will entertain a motion to have a vote for our first nominee, Ms. Kennard, and our second nominee, Dr. Birch.
Okay, what are we doing? Entertaining a motion?
To have a vote.
Oh, to vote. Okay. Yes, I moved then.
I second the motion to close the nominations and move to a vote on secretary.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm getting a lot of messages of direct. Okay. So thank you for the first and second motion to entertain a vote for both. At this time, let me pause and give Ms. Kennard the floor. As I stated, she is a new member on our HSAC. She filled our city seat earlier in August. So we want to welcome you to the HSAC committee and actually allow you to introduce yourself to all of us. And if you want to share anything with folks, so we can get to know you a little bit, and then we'll allow Dr. Birch.
Hello, my name is Shay Kennard. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I currently work for Duke Energy, and I own a publishing company called SRC Publishing. I love to read and write. I enjoy reading through contracts and sifting through things like that. But I also do a lot of hands-on things in the community as far as donations. I collect clothes throughout the year for homeless people, and I also make sure that we donate turkeys every year. So I try to get my hands dirty in every way that I can. I know I'm new and I have a lot to learn. So I'm willing to learn, but I'm also coming with brand new ideas as well. So yeah, hello, nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Ms. Kennard, and welcome. I love that you are joining and ready to work. Welcome.
Thank
All
you.
right, Dr. Birch, I know you, but introduce yourself and share with us anything that you would like.
I am Angelo Birch. Probably don't like to talk about myself much. Willing to work where I can. Been with HSAC for a minute now. Enjoy where we can work for our homeless population. Currently the executive director for the American Community Coalition, and where we look at partnering with other agencies to take care of our youth and our people in our community, as well as the chairman of the board for Head Start.
All
I
right,
put myself
thank you.
on mute and off.
Thank you so much, Dr. Birch. He is very modest. He's been working in the community for a number of years. Thank you, Dr. Birch. All right. Right before their brief introductions, I did entertain a motion. It was first and seconded for a vote. We are going to move into that vote. If folks can take a look at their chat box, if you can send a private message to Ruby Holmes in our chat box on your vote for the nomination for secretary. Again, on the slate for nominees is Miss Shay Kennard as nomination, and Dr. Birch. If you can send Miss Ruby Holmes a private message letting her know your vote.
Madam Chair, I just want to be clear. You want us to send Ruby Home an email of our vote, correct?
Send Ruby Holmes a direct message in this chat, in the Zoom chat there to your right. If you send Ruby Holmes a direct message with who your vote is for. Sharita, I see your light is lit up. Did you have something?
I'm sorry. That's my phone, and I didn't realize I was no longer on mute. I'm sorry.
It's okay. All right, while you guys are getting your votes in through private message here in our chat box to Ruby Holmes, we are going to circle back around to our vice chair. It is an elected position, so Ms. Helen Tripp has served as our secretary this past year, and the exec committee wants to nominate her to move into the vice chair position. At this time, I will entertain a motion on the floor to vote for Ms. Helen Tripp to move into the vice chair position. I will entertain a motion at this time.
So moved.
I
Seconded.
Okay, thank you. First and seconded. Thank you.
I didn't catch who seconded.
Was it Colleen or?
Angel did the second.
Okay.
I moved.
Yeah, it was Angel and Angela.
All right, first and seconded. Thank you. All right, so we have a vote on the floor. So I'm gonna take you guys back to your chat box, and you can place your chat, your vote in their chat box. So we are voting on accepting the nomination for Ms. Helen Tripp to move from position of secretary onto our vice chair. You can place your votes in the chat. Yes for voting yes, no, or if you abstain. You can place that in your chat boxes now.
Are we sending that to Ruby too? Or to everyone?
You can put it to everybody. All righty. Okay. All righty. Thank you guys so much for using this technology. I appreciate that. As it stands, we will congratulate Ms. Helen Tripp for moving into the vice chair position. Thank you so much for your service this past year. And I know that you will work alongside of Angel and the rest of the exec committee on our HSAC mission. Thank you so much. Okay, so our votes for the secretary seat are in. Thank you so much for sending those messages to Ruby Holmes. And Dr. Birch, you have been selected as our HSAC secretary. Thank you and congratulations. All right. Well, that will conclude, to my knowledge, unless someone sends me a message, that will conclude our election of our new officers. Thank you so much to community development for your support over the last year. Thank you so much to Angel, Helen, and all others that have served in the capacity with HSAC and the exec committee. Thank you so much for all of those that chair the different committees that we have. We know that we have some great work ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to working under your leadership. Starting in September, we will welcome Miss Angel. She will be facilitating our September meeting. Miss Helen Tripp as Vice Chair and Dr. Birch as Secretary. Thank you all.
If I may, I would like to step in and say thank you very much, Alicia, for your time served as chair. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and I think we all can agree that you handled a very challenging year with grace and diplomacy and great efficiency at keeping meetings on track and on time and in a challenging COVID virtual world. So thank you very much for your hard work this past year, and also to Helen and Miss Angel for their work as well. But since you're the one transitioning off the board at this point, we do want to call you out and just say thank you.
Thank you. Couldn't do it without you guys. Thank
Can I
you.
add to that, Madam Chair? You have done a great job.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate what Colin said. What a year. Believe me, I've chaired some meetings this year. I know what it's like. And you've had a big group of people to chair, and you have just done a superb job. I have been so impressed and appreciative of your leadership. So I really, really want to thank you.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, Alicia. I hope I can follow in your shoes and do what has to be done. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all.
I can't hear you.
There we go. Let's
Oh.
switch gears just a little bit. We have a few more things on the agenda to tackle. So I'm going to pass it on to Colin. It sounds like you have a COVID update for us, possibly some information about the Carolina Duke Inn. You have the floor.
Thank you. I put together just a brief little overview of kind of where we are. I've heard a lot of people asking questions about funding opportunities, what's available, what's not available, what are we doing now that we've got a Delta variant surging, and it looks like, you know, hotel and duplexes that we've had under contract that are due to expire at the end of December. What's next? What are we doing with White Flag? So we thought it'd be wise to do a quick update of where we are, what's going on, and sort of a path forward. So if you'll grant me permission here, I will share my screen and we can sort of go through this. So we're just going to go over just a real brief, very, very brief presentation just to sort of highlight a few things. There we go. So this is, as most of you know, the city was allocated $2.6 million of ESG COVID funds. Those funds were allocated into the categories that you'll see at the top here: $933,000, $681 for rapid rehousing, $866,265 for emergency shelter, $110,000 for street outreach, $486,456 in prevention funds. And that $2.6 million comes with 10% of that being eligible for administrative purposes. So we took that full 10% and placed it into this. Currently, there's $479,971 in rapid rehousing contracts that we put into place last July. Out of that, $244,000 has been spent. We do anticipate this full $479,000 to be fully spent by the end of its contract, which is December 31st, 2021. We have two contracts that used emergency shelter funds. One is with Project Access and one was with Open Table Ministries for White Flag. In January through March of this year was the White Flag contract. That used $231,839.86. Out of that total amount of contracts, 194,000 has been spent. We do anticipate the balance to be fully spent by the end of December of 2021. We do not have any funds currently in contract or being spent under street outreach and prevention, as those funds have been placed into the RFP that is currently on the streets and is due back to community development on Friday afternoon of this week. So once we get that back and get scored, we will know how the balance, as you'll see down here, amount in RFP, we'll know how all of these will be awarded out amongst these eligible categories. There is $139,000 of administrative funds that are in contracts. 61,000 of that is funding that the city took in order to bring on temporary staff to help us administer the COVID contracts, because we just don't have capacity with Lloyd, Ruby, Hanalea, and I are swimming uphill as fast as we can and needed an extra set of hands. So we needed some help. So at this point, we've spent a decent amount of money, not tons, but we're moving in the right direction. And this RFP, the amount that's in the RFP, as you can see below, for rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, street outreach, and prevention. So I'll stop here if there's any questions. All right. I'll move on. So summary of these funds, I do want to just flag that 20% of that $2.6 million or $532,533.60 must be spent by September 30th. As of right now, there's about $42,000 left to go to meet that. We expect we will definitely hit that number once we receive July and August invoices from vendors. So we are working through processing invoices as quickly as possible. The vendors have shared, those who have contracts have shared, spending money has been a challenge for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons involve difficulty in finding staff turnover, and on the rapid rehousing side, difficulty finding landlords willing to accept people coming out of the homeless system, and landlords who have rents that meet the federal fair market rent standards. And because those standards are lower than what the market is dictating they can get from non-federally funded sources. So landlords, they're looking at it as a business. Why am I going to take $1,000 if I can get $1,200 for the same unit? And we want to make sure that we get 80% of these funds must be spent by March 31st. That's the other trigger for HUD. And if we don't hit those timelines, community development will have to file paperwork with HUD and let HUD know that we do have a spending plan and how much of these funds will be fully spent by September 30th, 2022. Now that September 30th, 2022 means we have to have all of the funds documented and in our systems before then, so that HUD can, we have to draw all the funds by there. So contracts will need to end June 30th. So there's time to process, draw, and pay out all of those dollars and get things reconciled. Next piece is COVID housing options. And as you know, we are looking at what are we going to do with COVID after December 31st, 2021. And currently we have a duplex that is under contract through December 31st, 2021. That duplex has changed ownership. There's a new owner. The new owner is honoring the contract through December 31st and has expressed interest and a willingness to continue the contract into the new year if that's possible. So we are working closely with Drew Cummings and the county to explore what are options and the viability of making that happen to ensure we have a place for people experiencing homelessness who test positive for COVID to recover. We are also aware that while we have social distancing guidelines in place, it makes it incredibly difficult for us to go back to a congregate shelter. And we are talking and trying to find ways to make sure that we have a non-congregate shelter in place until those social distancing guidelines are lifted. As if we shut down the Carolina Duke Inn at this point in time, there would be a significant number of people discharged into unsheltered homelessness, as they would not be able to go back to a congregate shelter at Urban Ministries. And we don't want to be doing that at this point with people who are medically vulnerable. The white flag that we had last year that was operated by, well, not last year, it was last season. It was actually January of this year. It was operated by Open Table Ministry. We will be talking through white flag shelter options after this ESG RFP closes this week, as this is an eligible criteria in that RFP. So we'll work through after all of this closes out what the white flag plans will be, and we will make sure to keep the HSAC up to date on what the white flag plans are before we get into cold weather season. Keeping in mind that we do recognize that more likely than not, a congregate non-socially distanced option is probably not going to be advisable for the foreseeable future. So we're going to have to try and be working closely with public health and making sure we have options to keep everybody safe. And then we are sort of beginning to look at those long-term options, the home funds that are coming that are specifically targeted to the homeless system. It's a $4.3 million chunk of change. That money is not something that will happen, that will help us in the short term due to the nature of the funds waiting on agreements from HUD, waiting on money, waiting on regulations, RFPs. And those are typically for construction acquisitions. So I'm saying conservatively, 3 years maybe is the soonest, maybe 2 years, but probably closer to that 3 to 8 year time frame before all of that stuff is actually implemented, depending on what actually happens, just due to the time involved it takes to secure funds and get all the logistics worked out and identifying projects to move forward to implement those. And that's it. So questions for all of you?
So Colin, will the HSAC committee in the next, I guess, couple months have to do a vote or send a recommendation to the city? Is that the next steps if we want to recommend going beyond December?
So I think I'll let Drew respond to that. I don't know where, or maybe even Commissioner Carter may be able to weigh in on where the county is sitting on extending hotel and duplex options. Drew?
Hi, everybody. We have not had sort of more than general conversations about the likelihood of that being necessary. Certainly our interest is not to put anybody out on the street. And we recognize, as Colin said, that the likelihood of kind of pre-COVID densities being allowable under CDC guidelines at Urban Ministries or any other shelter for that matter are not right around the corner, and that therefore we will need to maintain some options, some most likely non-congregate options, as Colin said, for sort of the foreseeable future, but exactly what that will look like, we have not yet determined or had board conversations about. Hope that helps.
Thank you for that. I don't have any other questions. Does that generate any other questions from anyone else? I anticipate that we will be watching this closely over the next couple months as, like you mentioned, COVID has shifted. You see the comment from Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, and Ryan is absolutely correct. There are a lot of communities are behind on spending their ESG COVID funds, and a lot of that was essentially Durham for specifically got roughly 4 or 5 years worth of ESG funding on top of our normal allocation of ESG funding, and said, here, spend basically 10 times your annual funding in 2 years. And while that's a great thing in concept, because it allows us to do great things for the community, it becomes a huge challenge when there isn't an infrastructure in place to absorb those funds. Hiring new staff is not something that happens overnight. Getting contracts into place, updating consolidated plans and action plans takes time, and working through it. So we're not the only ones who are a little bit behind on it. And it seems that HUD is aware of this and has released some new guidelines on eligible expense categories in some of the places that in rapid rehousing and prevention, for instance, purchasing furniture for people in those programs is now an eligible expense. They're providing money that will allow ESG to be used to help with vaccine incentive payments. So they're trying to come up with ways to be more flexible in their spending, it seems like, than they have been with historic ESG funds. So it is nice to see the flexibility, and hopefully that flexibility will allow us to ramp up some spending, as those are things that clearly people experiencing homelessness, when they move into their first unit, typically don't have beds, couches, dining room tables, and chairs. It's usually a hodgepodge of what's donated and what can be found very inexpensively. So this is a great way of allowing people experiencing homelessness moving into their first homes a little bit more dignity and respect, so they're not having to sit on a kitchen floor to eat dinner or sit on a bed because that's the only piece of furniture they have. So we'll see how it plays out. We are working with vendors, and I anticipate we'll be working with any of the new contracts that are awarded through the RFP to, work as expeditiously as we can to spend wisely and spend within the regulations, so nobody gets findings or runs afoul of HUD rules.
All right. Thank you, Colin, for keeping us updated on COVID and what our options are in the community. Thank you so much for, keeping us posted. I know in the exec committee, we talked about, there's probably been over 330 folks that were served. Was it between Carolina Duke and the duplex over this past year?
It was between all of the hotels. So
Okay.
when we went to Marriott RTP, Carolina Duke Inn, we're well over 300 individuals since we first moved to hotels that were served by this. So it is a valuable tool in our community, just looking at the numbers of people who have come through. It's clearly a need.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So yes, more to come. Thank you. All right, moving right along. I kind of did this already, but thank you so much to Ms. Kennard, Ms. Shay Kennard. You are our new HSAC member, filling our city seat. Thank you so much for joining the HSAC committee. As I mentioned earlier, I love your enthusiasm and that you're joining ready to work. And don't fret, I'm recruiting some positions in just a few minutes, so we still have some work that you can pitch in for, but welcome. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda.
Alicia, this is Steve Schul. I should have asked
Yes.
this. It just a question occurred to me for Colin. Colin, and I'm sorry, Alicia. Colin, we've been talking about a permanent facility for respite care, non-congregate respite care. Is any of this money eligible for that sort of expenditure?
You bring up a great point, Mayor Schul. The home funds would be a possibility for that. And what we're looking to do is get some input from providers, people experiencing homelessness in terms of where our needs are. Because yes, we do need a permanent structure. One of the other things that we've identified that we've heard over the years is the need for a day shelter, the need for a non-congregate shelter, just in terms of an emergency shelter. We do need the medical respite place. We need a winter shelter. There's so many different things, and we need additional permanent supportive housing units. So all of those those have all been identified throughout time as needs of the homeless system. So our hope is to be able to line those all up and say, okay, what is it that our community needs the most? Kind of prioritize it and figure out how many of each of these do we need, and then be able to come back to city and county leadership with that proposal coming through the HSAC of saying, hey, we've identified we need X number of units of medical respite, X number of units of non-congregate, this much space for a day shelter, whatever it comes out from the data, and then be able to bring that back and say, okay, can we do this for $4.3 million, or is this going to be something that costs more? If it is something that goes to cost more, then it would be a request for, okay, is there additional ARPA money, for instance, that could be put into this to make that transformative impact that would be able to check off as many of the boxes as we can, knowing that, if we needed 100 units of everything, that's probably not a realistic number, but can we design something that would be scalable so that in the future, if and when money and other resources became available, we could scale up, but set it up so that we can scale according to funding that is available. And as you well know, building is always the easy piece. It's the ongoing operations and supporting it that's the challenge. So that's the other piece that we have to keep in mind as we look at those. But great point. So yes, we are exploring those.
Thank you, Colin. And that home money is what you said would be available in 3 to 8 years. That's not the current money.
That home money has been, the city of Durham has been told we're getting $4.3 million. We don't have a contract with HUD for that dollar amount yet. And we don't have all of the rules and regulations that will come with it. We just have the very general guidelines. So my 3 years is a best guess of by the time we get a grant agreement, by the time we get through, identifying funding sources, are we adding more money to it? Is it only going to be a flat 4.3? And what is the project going to look like? And by the time we got to a finished product, I don't see that happening short of 2 to 3 years from today. That's my best guess. Could it happen faster? It could, but I just don't want anybody thinking that $4.3 million is available right here, right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, Performance Management Committee Quarterly Report. Hi, Mr. Crooms, do you have anything for HSAC?
I sure do, Alicia.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you again. I have been the chair of the Performance Management Subcommittee for the past year. And from our quarterly update here, I just want to share 3 things. One, our group has been working on reviewing and revisiting the performance standards. The performance standards are a set of criteria that we use to evaluate our transitional housing projects, our rapid rehousing, our permanent supportive housing, our emergency shelter, to see how well they are doing in terms of helping our neighbors get out of homelessness and into housing. It is a very big project, and so we have spent 2 meetings just going over what we have and beginning the conversation about changes for it. We are going to take a little bit of a break from it right now because the Performance Management Committee has to take up another duty. And that the second thing I want to share with you all is that we are now in the middle of evaluating state emergency solutions grant applications. So as you know, this time of year, about mid-August, the request for proposals goes out. And then we have a very short window of period in which to evaluate proposals from our projects for that funding from the state. So we are going to be working on that very intensively over the next month. We have a great scoring committee already at work. And then once we get through that, we will pick up again on the performance standards as we get into the fall. The last thing that I would like to bring up, and I'm sort of preempting Alicia on this, is that of course the Performance Management Committee is always looking for new members. I would love to just invite Ms. Shay Kennard to consider joining us. I echo what Alicia said about your enthusiasm and willingness to volunteer. I certainly wouldn't want your first experience of HSAC to be being voted down from secretary. So I want to issue a personal invitation that you are welcome to join this committee, and we love enthusiasm and willingness to learn. So finally, I do want to say thank you to all of the members of the Performance Management Committee over the past year for their effort. I hope that those who are members of HSAC will and are able will continue to stay on, as you can. We are losing two wonderful liaisons, Shayna Kergnan and Ricky Gardner have been a very big part of the group the past 2 years. So I do want to thank them before the whole group for their service. So those three things are what I have for you all today on the quarterly report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Well, Jonathan, I will be happy to join your team.
Wonderful.
By all means, I'll be happy to join your team. Just let me know what I need to do.
Will do.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. So yes, that brings me to my final item on the agenda, a call for new standing committee members. So a little bit of background, as Jonathan mentioned, the COC governance charter delegates some HSAC responsibilities to the standing committees. Sufficient HSAC membership on these committees is necessary to maintain the COC representation and the HSAC decision-making responsibility. So we do want to encourage folks that are interested in joining the Performance Management Committee. Please let us know. We would be more than happy to have you join this committee. As Jonathan mentioned, they are working on a lot of great things, have done some great work over the last year. I would echo the same as Jonathan. Thank you to Ms. Kerrigan and Ms. Gardner. I think most people on this committee are thinking that you both were HSAC members because you ladies are both so much involved, and I think that just speaks to your dedication, and I appreciate you both. Secondly, our Policy and Planning Committee. Sharita, you're the chair of that committee, correct? I wanted to see if you had anything.
Well, I'm not as prepared, I think, as Jonathan was to make
okay. Well, if you're interested in policy and planning, let Sharita know. We are recruiting chairs for those committees and folks to join those planning. Policy and planning is definitely a big piece of our HSAC operations. All right, thank you. All right, so let us know if you are interested in serving in either one of those capacities. Last but not least, I wanted to see if there are any announcements from any of our HSAC members, or if there are any announcements from our COC members. Now is the time. Lloyd, you have something? I see you came on camera. Okay, go ahead, Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to let the HSAC and the COC know that HUD has released the 2021 Continuum of Care NOFO. It's no longer a NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, but now it's a Notice of Funding Opportunity. Don't know why, but HUD changes the names periodically. Anyway, Durham is eligible to apply for annual renewal demand, which is the amount of money needed to renew all of our currently funded projects that are up for renewal this year for $1,385,194. This year's NOFO is saying that all of that entire amount will be in Tier 1. So if we have a good application and good project applications, all of the projects in Tier 1 would be fully funded for that amount. In addition to that, Durham is eligible to apply for a permanent housing bonus of $91,544. And HUD is combining 2 years worth of a domestic violence bonus nationwide of $102 million. Durham is eligible to apply for $274,631 of the domestic violence bonus. Those funds could be used for, they need to be used for a rapid rehousing project, specifically for rapidly rehousing survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic violence, or a supportive services only project for our coordinated entry system to improve its ability to serve the needs of survivors of domestic violence. In addition, a non-competitive grant that the department is eligible for applying for as the COC lead agency. It's called a planning grant. That value is $54,926. So our Tier 2 funds are going to be $366,175. HUD released the NOFO last week, and the deadline for completing our consolidated application is November 16th. So we do have that time, that clock is also ticking on that. So we will work on getting that done as well over the next several months, and more information to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, Lloyd, for those announcements.
Excuse me, Lloyd, this is Tracy. Did you cite the deadline that the applications were due to the city of Durham? I'm sorry.
We did not announce a deadline yet for the completion of the eSNAPS applications, as well as the submission of the eSNAPS applications to the department. We're still working on finalizing that, but we will announce it hopefully soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lloyd, could you ballpark that estimated time of having to submit that to community development?
Ballpark, well, I could use Colin's estimate of within the next 3 months or so, or 3 years, but more seriously, I am thinking probably sometime between mid-September to early October. Is that general enough?
Sure, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Ruby, I see your hand.
Hi, I had an announcement for all HSAC members only to complete your conflict of interest form. It's in the chat box, but I've also sent it out by email. And if there's anyone who is interested in joining the policy and planning and performance management committees, please email me at durhamopeningdoors@durhamnc.gov sooner rather than later. And we will get working on that for next month's meeting.
All right, thank you. All righty, well, that will bring us to the end of our meeting agenda. until next month, folks, at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn our meeting.
All right, thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Sharita and Ebony, and I think Dr. Birch. I think all three. All right, thank you, guys. We are adjourned. See everybody next month.